Let me say something that's going to be uncomfortable, the disrespect in your life. You trained it, not intentionally. But every time you stayed silent when something stung, every time you smiled through a comment that cut deep, every time you waited and accommodated and over-explained, their brain wrote a rule. A permanent behavioral rule that says, this person costs nothing to underestimate. And that rule, it spreads. Here's what most people never understand. Respect is not given because you're good. It's not earned through words or conversations. Respect is trained through patterns, consequences, and signals. Get those signals wrong and it doesn't matter how talented, how kind, or how capable you are. You will remain optional. What you're about to hear are 5 forms of disrespect, not the loud, obvious kind. The quiet kind. The kind that's been eroding your authority, your confidence, and your leverage in slow motion, right in front of you, without you even noticing. And the moment I name them, you will see them everywhere. You cannot unhear what comes next. So stay with me, because this isn't about anger or revenge. This is about something far more powerful. This is about reclaiming the position you were always supposed to hold. Let me start with something that nobody wants to admit. When someone ignores you, delays you, cancels on you at the last minute, or only responds when it suits them, your first instinct is to blame them. Their rudeness, their arrogance, their lack of consideration. And maybe that's partially true. But here's the deeper, more uncomfortable reality that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. They learned it from you, not because you told them to, not because you sat down one day and said, hey, feel free to treat me like an option, but because you showed them through your behavior, through your patience, through your silence, that access to you carries no real cost. And the human brain is a pattern machine. It doesn't need instructions. It just watches records and repeats whatever works. So when you waited anyway, when you rescheduled anyway, when you sent that long explaining message trying to make them understand how their behavior made you feel, their brain didn't receive a lesson in respect. It received a confirmation that no matter what they do, you'll still be there, still available, still accommodating. And that confirmation is worth more to them than anything you could ever say. This is why words don't fix this problem. You can have the most honest, most mature, most emotionally intelligent conversation in the world about how their behavior affects you, and nothing will change, because this was never a communication issue. It was a behavioral one. People don't adjust based on what you tell them. They adjust based on what you show them. Think about the people in your life right now who treat your time as flexible, who respond to your messages on their own schedule, who cancel plans without real guilt and expect you to understand. Ask yourself honestly, did that behavior start overnight? Or did it grow slowly, one small moment at a time, each one slightly more than the last because each one passed without consequence? That's how it always works. Nobody wakes up and decides to disrespect you. They drift into it, they find the edges of what you'll accept, and they settle there comfortably because you made it comfortable. And here's the part that stings the most. The people who get treated this way most often are not the weak ones. They're the dependable ones, the understanding ones, the ones who genuinely care, who give people the benefit of the doubt, who believe in being mature and not making things difficult. These qualities are real strengths, but without a behavioral boundary attached to them, they become an open invitation. Because what the other person learns is not that you're strong. What they learn is that you're safe to take for granted. The correction for this is not emotional. It's not a confrontation. It's not an ultimatum. It's something quieter and far more powerful. You simply start matching energy with energy. You become slightly less available. You stop rearranging your schedule to absorb someone else's inconsistency. You respond on your own timeline instead of rushing to prove your availability, not out of bitterness, not as a game, but as an accurate reflection of the effort being given. When access to you starts to feel less guaranteed, something shifts in the other person's mind. Not because you said anything, but because they felt something change. And what they feel is this: that maybe, just maybe, they've been taking something valuable for granted. Scarcity creates value. Consistency without cost creates invisibility. The moment you stop being endlessly available is the moment people start paying attention. There's a specific kind of disrespect that doesn't happen in private. It happens in front of people, and that's exactly what makes it dangerous. Most people have experienced this at some point. You're in a room, a meeting, a dinner, a group conversation, and you say something. And before you even finish your thought, someone cuts across you, corrects you, dismisses your point with a wave of their hand or a sharp little comment that gets a laugh from the people around you. And in that moment, something happens that goes far beyond the words exchanged. Your position in that room just got tested. Here's what most people fundamentally misunderstand about public contradiction. They think it's about the topic being debated. They think the other person genuinely disagrees and is simply expressing that disagreement. Sometimes that's true. But more often, far more often than people realize, public contradiction has nothing to do with the subject matter at all. It's about something much more primal. It's about rank. It's about who gets to define reality in a shared space. And it's about testing whether you'll defend your position or quietly surrender it. Human beings are wired for hierarchy. We have been for thousands of years. And even in modern civilized settings, boardrooms, family dinners, social gatherings, that ancient social calibration never switches off. People are constantly unconsciously reading the room, watching who speaks and who gets interrupted, who gets challenged and how they respond, who holds their ground and who folds. And every single one of those observations updates their internal ranking of the people around them. This is why one moment of public contradiction, handled poorly, can quietly shift how an entire group sees you. And here's where most people make their first mistake. They go passive. They tell themselves they're being the bigger person. They swallow the interruption, let the dismissal slide, and move on. Internally, they justify it. I don't need to prove myself. I know my own worth. Confident people don't react. That sounds mature. It even feels mature. But it ignores something critical about how social dynamics actually function in real time. Silence in those moments is never neutral. The room doesn't read it as quiet confidence. The room reads it as acceptance. And the person who challenged you reads it as permission to do it again. The second mistake is the opposite extreme. Snapping back, getting visibly frustrated, raising your voice or making the moment bigger than it needs to be. This also damages your standing, not because you defended yourself, but because you did it with emotion rather than control. Reactivity signals instability, and instability is the fastest way to lose a room. The right response lives in a very narrow space between those two extremes. It's calm, it's brief, it's visible. You don't argue. You don't over-explain. You don't match their energy or try to win the debate. You simply reclaim the frame. A short, composed correction, a steady redirect. A quiet statement that closes the door without drama and without invitation for further debate. What that does, psychologically, socially, in real time, is enormous. It signals that you noticed, that you're present, that challenges don't pass through you unacknowledged. And it does all of that without making the room uncomfortable, without making you look reactive, and without turning a small moment into an unnecessary conflict. Done correctly, it doesn't just shut down that one attempt. It sets a standard. People recalibrate. The ones watching update their read of you. And the person who challenged you now understands something they didn't understand before, that there's a cost to testing you publicly. And that cost is clarity, immediate, composed, and impossible to misread. There is a form of disrespect so carefully disguised that most people never call it what it actually is. It comes wrapped in laughter. It arrives with a smile. It hides behind the most socially acceptable excuse a person can use, "I'm just joking." And because it wears that mask so comfortably, most people let it pass. They laugh along. They brush it off. They tell themselves they're not being sensitive, that it's harmless, that it doesn't really mean anything. But here's what's actually happening underneath that joke. Every disguised insult is a test. A carefully constructed, socially protected test to see exactly how much you'll absorb before you push back. The person delivering it may not even be fully conscious of what they're doing. But their brain is running a calculation in real time. How much can I say wrapped in humor before this person draws a line? And every time you laugh it off, every time you stay quiet, every time you let it slide to keep the peace, you answer that question loudly, clearly. And the answer you give is more. You can say more. You can push further. There is no line here. And so it continues. What makes this particular form of disrespect so corrosive is not any single comment. It's the accumulation. One joke lands. Nothing happens. Another follows, slightly sharper. Still nothing. Then another, and over weeks and months a pattern gets established. A quiet, socially normalized pattern where your dignity becomes the punchline and your silence becomes the permission slip. You start to notice it in how you feel after certain conversations. There's a subtle heaviness, a low-grade irritation you can't quite name, a sense that something was off but you can't point to exactly what because on the surface everything looked friendly. That feeling is your instinct doing its job correctly. It's telling you that something was taken from you. Not dramatically, not violently, but steadily and with a smile. Now here's what matters most: the response. Because most people get this completely wrong. They either say nothing, which we've already established gives full permission, or they explode. They let it build and build until one day they react with a frustration that seems disproportionate to the comment that triggered it. And when that happens, the other person gets to flip the script entirely. Suddenly you're the sensitive one. You're the one who overreacted. You're the one making things awkward over just a joke. And just like that, the dynamic shifts, not in your favor, but against you. The window for an effective response is not after the 10th comment. It's at the first one. Not with anger, not with a lecture, not with a long explanation about why what they said was hurtful. Those responses hand them too much information about your emotional state and too much leverage over your reactions. The right response is calm, direct, and delivered without apology. A slight shift in your expression. A pause that creates weight. A simple, flat statement, not aggressive, not pleading, just clear, that communicates one thing and one thing only. That didn't land the way you intended it to. That's it. No drama. No extended discussion. Just a clean, composed signal that the boundary exists. What happens in that moment is significant. The laughter stops. The room recalibrates. And the person who delivered the comment is now faced with a choice: adjust or reveal themselves. Either way, you win. Either the behavior corrects itself or the mask comes completely off and you see exactly who you're dealing with. Both outcomes give you something far more valuable than comfort. They give you clarity. This one is the most dangerous of all 5. Not because it's the loudest, not because it's the most obvious, but because it doesn't look like disrespect at all when it first arrives. It looks like persistence. It looks like someone who really needs your help. It looks like a friend pushing a little because they care. It looks like flexibility being requested, not a boundary being violated. And that disguise, that incredibly convincing, socially acceptable disguise, is precisely what makes it so destructive. Boundary erosion doesn't kick the door down. It knocks politely. Then it knocks again. Then it starts testing whether the door was ever really locked in the first place. It starts small, almost invisible. A favor asked after you've already said you're busy. A conversation pushed into personal territory slightly faster than you're comfortable with. A request for one exception to something you already said no to. And in isolation, each of these moments feels manageable, forgivable, not worth the friction of addressing directly. So you let it go. You make the exception. You shift your boundary just slightly to accommodate. And you tell yourself it was a one-time thing. But it was never a one-time thing. Because what just happened, in behavioral terms, is that the other person ran an experiment. They pushed, they watched, they waited to see what you would do. And when you moved, when you adjusted, when you made that small concession, their brain recorded the result. Not maliciously, not with calculated intent, but automatically the way all human brains process feedback. The experiment concluded with one clear finding: this boundary is negotiable. And negotiable boundaries don't stay boundaries for long. Here's what nobody tells you about this process. The person eroding your boundaries is often not a bad person. They're not sitting somewhere plotting how to wear you down. Most of the time, they genuinely believe their request is reasonable. They genuinely think one exception won't matter. But that belief, however sincere, is completely irrelevant to the damage being done, because the damage isn't caused by their intention. It's caused by the pattern, and patterns don't care about intentions. Patterns only care about what gets reinforced. Every concession teaches something. Every exception sets a new baseline. Every time you move your line, the line moves. And after enough movement, you look back and realize the boundary you started with is completely unrecognizable. You're giving time you don't have, energy you can't afford, and access you never agreed to. Not because anyone forced you, but because the drift happened so gradually you never felt the full weight of it until it was already too late. This is where self-respect gets quietly dismantled. Not in dramatic confrontations, not in obvious moments of cruelty, but in small, repeated, seemingly harmless moments where your no gets softened into maybe and your maybe gets worn down into yes. The response to boundary erosion cannot be emotional and it cannot be delayed. It has to happen at the moment of the push, not after the third push, not after you've built up enough frustration to finally say something. Right there, in the moment, calmly and without over-explanation. You don't justify your boundary. You don't apologize for having one. You don't hand them a detailed reasoning they can then argue against. You simply restate it, firmly, briefly, and then you follow through with your behavior. Because here's what consistent enforcement actually communicates, not just to them, but to your own nervous system. It communicates that your limits are real, that your time has weight, that your comfort and your priorities are not automatically subordinate to someone else's convenience. And once that message is received, truly received, the dynamic shifts in a way that no conversation ever could. This one will confuse you the most, not because it's complicated, but because it won't always feel like disrespect when it's happening. There will be moments, genuine moments, where this person makes you feel seen, valued, and important. Where they listen carefully, engage warmly, and treat you with what feels like real consideration. And in those moments, you'll think to yourself that maybe you were wrong about them. Maybe the coldness was situational. Maybe the distance was just stress. Maybe things are actually fine, and then something shifts. You ask for something that doesn't benefit them. You have a need that doesn't align with their agenda. You show up at a moment that's inconvenient for their purposes. And just like that, the warmth disappears. The attentiveness evaporates. The person who just yesterday made you feel valued is now dismissive, impatient, or simply unavailable. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just gone. Replaced by a version of them that treats your presence as an interruption. And you're left trying to figure out what changed. That confusion is not accidental. It is the mechanism. It is precisely how selective respect operates and precisely why it is so psychologically damaging. Because your brain, the human brain, is not wired to handle inconsistency well. We are built for pattern recognition. We need things to make sense. We need people to be readable, and when someone oscillates between warmth and coldness, between attention and dismissal, between making you feel significant and making you feel invisible, your mind doesn't conclude that they're disrespecting you. Your mind concludes that something is wrong with you. That's where the real damage lives. You start replaying interactions trying to identify what you did differently. You start adjusting your behavior, trying to get back to the version of them that treated you well. You become slightly more careful, slightly more accommodating, slightly more focused on managing their perception of you. And without realizing it, you've handed them something extraordinarily powerful, the ability to regulate your self-worth through their inconsistency. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern, and patterns always serve someone. The person running selective respect, again, consciously or not, has created a dynamic where you are always slightly off balance, always slightly uncertain, always working just hard enough to maintain their approval that you never stop to question whether their approval was ever genuinely offered in the first place. The moments of warmth keep you invested. The moments of coldness keep you striving. And the cycle continues because you keep showing up the same way, regardless of how they treat you. That last part is the part you can actually change. The response to selective respect is not a conversation. It's not a confrontation. It's not an emotional appeal for consistency. All of those approaches hand the other person more information about how much their behavior affects you. And that information only deepens the imbalance. The response is behavioral and it is deliberate. You begin mirroring their energy with a slight delay. When they show up with genuine warmth and engagement, you engage fully but without overextending. When they become dismissive or cold, you quietly reduce your availability, your effort, and your emotional investment to match. Not as punishment, not as a game, but as an honest reflection of what's actually being offered. What this does is remove the guaranteed return they've been counting on. Suddenly, the dynamic they relied on, your consistent warmth regardless of their inconsistency, no longer functions the way it used to. And people only truly value what they realize they could actually lose. Your presence is not a utility. Your attention is not a default. Your warmth is not something that should be available on demand while being withheld at convenience. It is something that has to be earned consistently, every single time.